So Paraguay, I was called Spanish speaking, so I definitely thought I was just gonna speak Spanish. Um, so the Spanish in Paraguay is actually even it's different there too. It's very cut off. They close their mouths a lot when they talk, so they're not articulating very well. And when they speak Spanish, it's kind of just like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but I kind of like you could articulate it better, or I didn't get all that sometimes. Like they don't like saying their s's when they say más o menos, which is like so so. They would say like más o menos, and it's like, oh, okay, like I understood what you said. You didn't have the s there, so um, and then getting there, speaking Spanish before the mission, I thought, oh, this is gonna be great. I already speak the language, and I remember going into my first lunch cita or what would
Appointment.
yeah, my first lunch appointment. Um, the hermana was just like, "Oh, baite copio, elder," and I'm like, "Oh, hola!" Like, I have no idea what that means. And my companion just looks at it. And he's just like, "Oh, it just means like hello or what's up." I'm like, "Oh, okay. What was that?" And like, "Guarani," and like, so they actually speak that. And it's like, yeah, they actually speak that here. It's like fluently, and then whenever that question is asked, all the members go on a rampage. They're all just like, Elder, Guarani is the second official language of Paraguay. Like, it is a language. We speak it here. It is part of our culture. And then just go off about how important this language is to them, and which is why they all still speak it. And you just figure, well, I guess I'm gonna have to learn something. And you go picking it up as you go. The funnest thing to do is learning Mishimi, which is like a little bit, because something that all the missionaries learned is that the members love it. They'll ask you, oh, like, do you speak Guarani? And then you'll say, Mishimi no mas, and they'll all laugh. It's a never dying joke. It will always be a joke. Members will always laugh, and it'll sound like you know Guarani because you're saying Mishimi. Or just start when you'll start saying hi to people. You'll start even answering the phone and start saying "Baite copio," or "Ipora," which means I'm doing well or I'm good. Is how the response after would be. Later on, there are some missionaries who actually get really dedicated to it, and they start learning more phrases and they start learning to communicate more. Um, Other missionaries kind of focus on maybe, like I was a missionary that kind of focused on at least saying phrases, and the phrases getting me by, like saying, if we could say a prayer, right? And that would be like, Mava Japota Nyanimboe, and the member or the investigator they would like that. Honestly, like, it's something tender and it's something worth even putting an effort. There are missionaries who don't want to, but it's definitely an asset on the mission, especially in Asuncion North, because of how much more they speak it there. Everywhere they speak it quite a bit. So once you start saying phrases like that, it makes an automatic relationship with the person. Like, you ask them like even simple questions like, oh, like, do you have water? Or dero like, do you have water? Or stuff like that, and they'll just automatically just be appealed to you because you're trying. And it's something that helps a lot. It's also fun. It's also really fun to like go along with the lingo, and like even now, like, there are things that wa'u forever will be embedded into my vocabulary, because in Paraguay or in Guarani, people would be like, oh, wa'u, you went there. Like, for in literal translation, it'd be for fake or supposedly, but it just sounds so much better when you say wa'u. So forever it'll be a thing. Or just when people are about to slip, like hake, which is like, watch out. So even now, I'll say it to people on campus, or I'll say it to my roommates, or they'll do something like hake, like, what? Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry. Like, that's not real. I'm sorry. So it's pretty fun, honestly. You pick up a lot more than what you think. Guarani is like a really fun language. I actually would love to learn it more. They have a Book of Mormon in Guarani as well. No one can read it though. No one in Paraguay can read this book, by the way. It exists, but whenever we seem to give it out, they're like, oh, this is Guarani ite. And it's like, it means like pure Guarani. And they're like, well, what's the difference? Like, oh, well, we speak Jopara technically, not Guarani. And it's like, okay, what's that? It's like, oh, that's like a mixture of Spanish and Guarani. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, they have this book. You can have it. And they're like, okay, well, I'm not going to read it because I just have a Spanish one and I can read that one. So it's really interesting because no one actually speaks Guarani except like the elderly people. The elderly people, there are some that just don't actually know Spanish. They'll just speak to you in pure Guarani, and you basically kind of have to guess around. I think it took me at least, I think, a year, around my halfway point of my mission, where I started to pick out words in a sentence where I could actually understand the sentence, but mostly because of 4 key words that were said that I knew that were being said. If you know the basic words like areko, which is I have, or like she, me, de, you, like you start to pick these up and you start to like understand the sentences they're saying to you. But for the most part, it just comes. It just talking with the people, talking with your companions, learning how to say these funny phrases. It just all comes to you because it's just so much fun to say it. It's a lot more fun to learn it than to not learn Guarani at all. In Mexico, they use tú and usted. So talking to my mom, I would speak in usted. So I would just be like, oh, sí, mamá, ¿y qué quieres? O, ¿qué puedo hacer para usted? And in Guarani, in Paraguay, it's all in vos. So it's like, ¿y qué quieres? Or, venina un poco, which is like, come over here. And veni is in vos, and na is not an actual Spanish word. Like, I don't know where that comes from, but they'll be like, venina un poco, meaning come here a little bit, as opposed to in Mexican Spanish, it was like, puedes venir para acá? So like, can you come over here? So they'll say these things and you'll kind of like get the gist of it. It's just not kind of what the Spanish that I learned. And yeah, it's really funny. They're speaking in voz and then just adding like the little words like na and pio. They add that a lot. Or co, like they'll be like verdad co es, and it's like it's true, and I would be like eso es verdad, and so it means the same thing. Just in Paraguay, they're adding all these extra words, or they're saying it in the vos tense, so it just sounds different or it sounds weird. So
I was in the intermediate Spanish class at the MTC, which helped me a lot. So I felt like my first transfer of 6 weeks, after that, I was able to understand most of what people said to me. And then after another 6 weeks, so 3 months in the field, I was able to communicate most of what I wanted to say. So in 3 months, I felt fluent. After that, it was just kind of perfecting my Spanish and learning how to communicate myself better, learning different methods of teaching, learning new words. I spent the first half of my mission in Paraguay, so most of what you hear is going to be in Guarani, at least in the areas where I served. And so I spent my first half there about 8 or 9 months, and at the end of 8 months I felt like I could sort of understand what they would say to me in Guarani. So they would say something to me in Guarani and then I would just respond back in Spanish, and we would kind of have this conversation, half Guarani, half Spanish. But luckily most of the people can speak a little bit of Spanish at least, but their native language is Guarani. Argentina is a little better. Everyone there speaks Spanish, and they have a fun accent with the sh. So like in most of Spanish America they say calle, but in Argentina you say calle. I really like their accent. The Paraguayan accent is a little bit different too. In that little area of the world where I was, they kind of say it's ghetto Spanish, but I really love it.
They speak in Vos, que vos instead of like tú or usted, which are a little bit more formal. A vos. Vos in another country would be very disrespectful unless you were talking to like a dog or a very, very small child. Just kind of like being cutesy with it. But they talk to their best friends in vos. It's like, ¿qué hace vos? Which just means like, what are you doing, man? It's very slang Spanish, especially with like the youth. They're always speaking in vos. So that was something that they didn't teach me in the MTC, which I wish they would have at least covered, because I wasn't expecting it. They'll speak to missionaries usually in vos. Like I said, they have little phrases in Guarani which they'll mix in, which are always really fun to learn and stuff, and it usually takes a long time to understand, but that's fine. They will always say, to say cool would be purete. They always say that. That'd be like, oh yeah, that's cool, or awesome. They always say purete. Just means awesome or cool. And missionaries always do that. A lot of the I thought that this came from the missionaries, but apparently a lot of the Paraguayans do it too. So they'll just be like, hacueterei, which means it's really, really hot. And then they'll wipe their brow as if they're sweating and then flick their finger like that. So you'll see that all the time, like especially out in like the middle of nowhere, the ranchers and stuff. Hacueterei. And they'll flip their finger and then pretend as if they're like flicking off their sweat from the finger. So that's just like a little funny thing that they always do in Paraguay. So I had a very difficult time learning the language. Like I said, I was really stressed out in the MTC about not knowing Spanish. And I get to the mission and I expected, okay, I'll probably be able to talk to most people, and I felt pretty confident. And I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't communicate very well. And one of the biggest things that helped me was actually talking to little kids. So during lessons or after lessons, you get to like interact with the people, and they usually have tons of there's just always so many little kids in Paraguay. There's just tons, and they're so sweet and they're so innocent and humble, and they just love talking to missionaries. So that was the biggest thing that actually helped me get better at Spanish right at the beginning, was just talking to little kids and just trying to have long conversations with them, just because their vocabulary isn't super good and neither is mine. So I would always just try and just communicate and just practice that, because with the adults, once they realize that you don't speak Spanish very well, they're usually inclined to start talking to your companion, and you lose a lot of that practice. So I would always just try and talk to those little kids and just practice on that. So